Hi everyone, so here's where we left off in the last video version of the lesson. So this is Digi Workbook 8, and we're going to keep going with ecological succession. All ecosystems change over time, and as an ecosystem changes, the species it supports can also change. One community replacing another in a single place over a long period of time is called ecological succession. So I really like this GIF because it can show you the very first scene. There's just mountains and some sort of rock on the ground. And then little plants start to develop like ferns. And then flowering plants start to populate the area. And then we can add bigger trees and shrubs to that. And then the old growth forest, those really big trees like oak trees, end up populating the area. So this GIF does a good job of showing you that. And then during class, we're going to watch that YouTube video of people walking through different ecosystems. When a lava flow or a forest fire or a flood, something else devastates a landscape, new opportunities are made for organisms, and the pioneer species are the first to appear in the new habitat. Just like the pioneers took their wagons and moved west. So pioneer means first. If you're pioneering something, you're the first to try it. Small, fast-growing species like lichens and mosses tend to be the pioneers, and they actually break down the rock and help form soil so that other larger species that need more nutrients can grow there. Once soil is formed, small grasses and plants can grow, and then shrubs and bushes, and then eventually trees. This is how grassland can turn into a forest over time, and you can see something typically destroys the landscape. It could be a natural fire or a controlled fire. It could be an accidental fire as well. It could be something like a flood, anything that would change the landscape and destroy what was there and leave a blank slate of a landscape. And then it makes some logical sense that the smallest things can grow quickly. They don't need a ton of nutrients, not a ton of soil. And then eventually larger things like shrubs and small trees can grow. And then after about 150 years, you can have what's called the Climax Community, meaning the peak community. And that's where the ecosystem is really stable. Just like we maintain homeostasis, ecosystems also respond to change and restore the equilibrium. And we talked a bit about biodiversity last unit, and the more diverse an ecosystem is, the more stable it will be. So lots of different types of plants and animals that rely on each other and are interconnected in the food webs, that makes for a very stable environment. So you might recognize these pictures. On the left, we have where we planted the trees in Olympic National Park, and on the right, we have an old growth forest. So on the left, we have the picture of the valley we went to in Olympic National Park, and if you remember, that had been a dammed up river. So they dammed the river, which caused the area to flood and created a human-made lake. That was a lake for a long time, and then they decided that it was not good for the salmon population, so they undammed the river. All of the water flowed out, and now the environment has to essentially grow back. So you can see we started planting those small trees that look kind of like sticks. They look dead in this picture, but it was just winter. So eventually they'll start growing into the evergreen forests on the sides of the mountains in the picture, but in the foreground, you can see those were the annuals and perennials, like the grasses and small shrubs that can start to grow, and we were helping that ecosystem restore by planting the trees there. Then on the right, this is closer to where we had our campus, and that is an old growth forest. So you can see it's a lot more densely wooded. There are lots of different types of trees. You do have small grasses by the riverbed, but you can see large old trees. That's definitely a Climax Community old growth. And we also saw some really large trees that we could stand all the way around. So that is evidence of a community that's been there for a long time. Next, we're going to talk about trophic levels. So we discussed the food web earlier this week, but now we're going to talk about why there are certain numbers of organisms per each level. So there's a 10% rule, which means some of the energy that animals eat gets stored, but the rest is released as heat, and they use it to power themselves. So if you think of our producers as worth 100% of the energy they make because they photosynthesize and they use up a little bit of their own glucose, but really not enough to make a huge impact because they have a different process than we do for processing that energy, and they also don't have to run around. So they maintain homeostasis, but they go through a lot less energy doing that. So if you are a producer, we're going to say you're worth $100 if something eats you. $100 worth of energy, because we're talking about percents, and I find it a little bit confusing, so that's why I changed it to dollars. So who eats the producers? The primary consumers. So those are herbivores, things like grasshoppers and mouse, small rodents. And if we were looking at a farming type of picture, this would have the level with chickens, cows, and sometimes pig, which we'll get into in a moment. So things that we tend to eat are on this first level consumer. Now, if you're a mouse living your mouse life, you need to go find a place to live. You're going to need to find your food sources. You're going to need to run away from predators. And you're going to use up 90% of everything you eat, burning it to live your mouse life, because you need to power all of those functions. If something eats you, you, the mouse, are now only worth $10 of the original $100 worth of plants that you ate, because you burnt up 90%. So the 10% rule is you're only left with 10% of the original thing that you ate. Now, if we move up to the secondary consumer level, and this is actually where humans would be, we are omnivores that eat herbivores and plants. So the secondary level, those ate the primary consumers that ate the plants. And now, if you were to eat a secondary level consumer, those are only worth $1 of energy, 1% of the original energy, because this bird, for example, ate the mouse. The mouse had used up 90% of its energy from the plant. So the mouse is only worth $10, and then you use up 90% of that $10. And now if something eats you, you're only left with $1 worth of energy. So it's not very efficient to eat things on this tier, which is why there aren't that many organisms up at the top of the pyramid, why it's a pyramid shape, and why we tend to eat things below. Now, that being said, there are always top tier consumers, things like the quaternary or tertiary consumers, or apex predators, and scavengers also, I would put up there. So those eat things like the snake or the bird that ate the mouse or the grasshopper that ate the plants. So they're only getting $1 worth of energy from the animals that they eat. So if you were to eat an eagle, for example, that would only be worth 10 cents of energy, because that is, we used up 90% of this $100, we were left with 10. We used up 90% of the $10, we were left with $1. We used up 90% of that $1, that's 90 cents. We're only left with 10 cents. So that's why not many things eat from the top of this energy pyramid, because all these organisms use up the energy that they ate as heat and to power themselves and stay alive. Now we're going to move into discussing interactions. So we talked a bit about coevolution last week. Predator and prey interact in their ecosystem because species develop adaptations in response to each other. So if the predator gets clever, the prey needs to get faster. This is going to move back and forth, because if the predator always caught the prey would not survive, and that species would go extinct, and then that ecosystem would be out of balance. So this is evolutionary adjustment in the form of coevolution, and we talked about a few other scenarios. Maybe the prey gets better camouflage when the predator gets faster. Maybe the prey gets faster and the predator has to get craftier, whatever it might be. So they evolve back and forth, because you would not want one to always win out over the other. Next, we have symbiotic relationships, also called symbiosis. This is when two species live in close association with each other. So there are two forms where it's beneficial. One is called mutualism, like a mutual friend. Both organisms are mutually benefiting from their symbiotic relationships. So this example with the shrimp in the mouth of this fish, the fish is an herbivore. It doesn't eat that type of shrimp for its food. The shrimp eats the algae and the bacteria and little bits of other things that might be in the fish's mouth. It's kind of like a dentist. The fish gets clean teeth and the shrimp gets a meal. Then we have commensalism. Commensalism is where one species benefits and the other is neither harmed nor helped. So here's an orchid growing on a tree. Orchids typically grow in rainforests, and rainforests have a lot of foliage that make it really dark down on the lower levels of the rainforest. So the orchid grows on the side of the tree. It's not choking out the tree in any way. It's getting closer to the sunlight so it can photosynthesize, and the tree doesn't really care. Let's say you're eating pizza with a friend and you love the crust and they don't like their crust. At the end of the piece of pizza, your friend gives you the crust. They get it off their plate. They haven't wasted any food. They're happy. You eat it. You like it. You're happy because you like the crust, and you both benefit from that. Commensalism would be more like you and a friend are watching TV, but your friend is only on their phone, so you can pick whatever show you want because your friend doesn't care. That's kind of how commensalism is. You benefit, you're happy, you get to pick the show, your friend doesn't really mind either way, they're fine with whatever you pick. Next we have herbivory. So herbivory, like herbivore. Herbivores, like the cow eating the grass in this picture, don't kill the plants they eat. It's kind of like a haircut. So the plants don't try to defend themselves because they don't mind this. But some plants do have defense mechanisms like thorns or poisonous chemicals, things that would taste bad to an animal, because if every single plant got eaten by every single animal, again, our ecosystem would be out of balance. Sometimes herbivores adapt to those defenses. Maybe a bird pecks at a type of berry instead of eating the whole thing. That could be part of it. And grazing in this picture can actually help the plants grow back better or reseed the field, because as the cow eats the grass, it might eat the seeds, and then cow manure is great and fertile for grass. Next we have parasitism or parasitism. One organism feeds on another organism called a host. The host is usually larger than the parasite, so it's usually harmed but not killed. We talked about in class why the parasite is not designed to completely kill the host. The parasite gets a place to live. It has a source of nutrients. The host is typically sickened or weakened or just annoyed, perhaps. But if the parasite were designed to kill the host every time, they would be killing off their habitat. So some examples are tapeworm and fleas. We talked a bit about lice. Some of these can carry more harmful diseases, like fleas or mosquitoes, for example. Lice don't tend to carry harmful diseases. They're just annoying. But they are parasites because they feed on your blood from your scalp. And we do have some defenses against them, depending on what it is. If it's something like malaria, which is a parasite, your immune system can help start to fight it off. And if it's something like lice, it's actually important that they're itchy, because that's how you notice that you have them. Same with dogs scratching at fleas. The scratching mechanism is to try to get rid of it. Now, there are some fleas and lice that have evolved to not cause itching and irritation. That is a helpful adaptation for those lice that have that, because you would not notice that you have lice. The goal of any organism is to reproduce and pass their genes on. So if you don't kill the lice, they'll keep reproducing and spreading. So benefits the lice. Like I said before, with the lice that don't itch, parasites can evolve to overcome the host's defense. All right, that is the end of Digi Workbook 8. Make sure you have anything filled in that you missed. And Digi Workbook 9's video is coming soon.